Donald Trump's turns on the world stage have ranged from disastrous, think Helsinki, to rude, think pushing aside the leader of Montenegro, a NATO ally, to cringeworthy, think, well, last week when he offered this unusual message to Poland on the anniversary of World War II.
I just want to congratulate Poland. It's a great country with great people. We also have many Polish people in our country. It could be 8 million. We love our Polish friends.
Donald Trump's big foreign policy plays include forays into two parts of the world where his touch is anything but golden: North Korea and the Middle East. Trump's constant sucking up to Kim Jong-un, North Korea's murderous dictator, isn't working out for the United States, as pointed out by GOP strategist Rick Tyler. Tyler notes how Trump's record on North Korea compares to his predecessors. 0, the number of missiles Kim fired over Japan under President Obama. 2, the number of missiles Kim fired over Japan under Trump. Now Kim has solid fuel mobile rockets. Do you know why? Because Trump is a little pony that dictators like to ride for the fun of it, end quote. And then there's the matter of the Mideast. News today that Trump's Mideast envoy is departing before achieving any notable progress on a peace plan there. And the New York Times Magazine is out with an in-depth report from reporters Mark Mazzetti and Ronan Bergman on the U.S.-Israeli relationship. They conclude this about Trump's determination to exit the Iran deal. Quote, Trump's withdrawal from the deal, compounded by the events of recent months, has revived fears, not just that the United States could take military action against Iran or quietly bless an Israeli strike, but also that all the parties could stumble into a conflict out of hubris, miscalculation, or ignorance. Joining our merry band, Ron Klain, former chief of staff for both Vice Presidents Al Gore and Joe Biden, now an advisor to former Vice President Biden's presidential campaign. Donna, Frank, and Peter are still with us. I want to get you on, but I want to start with Peter Baker, because this reporting from his colleagues is, I think, one of the most in-depth looks, goes back to my old boss, George W. Bush's conversations and inside the room, if you will, in those high-level meetings with the Israelis on the topic of Iran and a potential military strike, goes inside the pros and cons, if you will, of former President Obama's approach to keeping secret the initial negotiations with Iran over that nuclear deal from the Israelis, and then to this very this view that seems to be held by a lot of former intelligence folks that whether he wants war or not, Donald Trump's sort of ignorance combined with his incompetence may result in a strike in Iran, whether we want it or not.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things this story reminds you of is how much we don't know, right? How much in the American-Israeli conversation is still shrouded in secrecy and mystery going back years, and how close we have come at various moments to a much bigger conflict in the Middle East than we already have right now. Israel, of course, is striking Hezbollah in Lebanon, but this is, this augurs for a much larger conflict, a much more dangerous one. Iran is a formidable foe, and if it became an open warfare that would involve potentially American forces as well, that's a very different thing. Now, you correctly said in your intro there that Donald Trump may not want this, and I think that's one thing that's really interesting about this president. As bellicose as he is, as much as he exudes hostility toward countries like Iran, he actually is not as interested in pulling the trigger as you would think. A couple months ago, or a month ago, I guess, he pulled back on that strike against Iran when they downed an American surveillance plane, said he didn't want to cause the casualties he was told would be caused. I think that that's a really interesting dichotomy within his administration, right? He doesn't want to be involved in these foreign entanglements as part of his political message in the campaign in 2016, and yet because he pulled out of the nuclear deal, it sets the stage for a slippery slope that could end him there, even though that's not what he wants.
And Ron Klain, it's a great piece of reporting, and it includes this quote: President Trump cannot expect to be unpredictable and expect others to be predictable. That's from Zarif, Iran's foreign minister. He said that during a speech in Stockholm in August. Quote, unpredictability will lead to mutual unpredictability, and unpredictability is chaotic. And as you know, as you all know, this is a part of the world where chaos, as Peter's saying, and as the piece points out, chaos and unpredictability can often lead to pretty tragic results.
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump clearly is practicing the inverse Teddy Roosevelt doctrine, which is he speaks very loudly and then is reluctant to use the stick. And as a result...
carry a small stick? Is that what
carry
you
a
say?
small stick or not use a stick. And as a result, we're seeing behavior that we're going to see from the Iranians, increasingly aggressive behavior from the Iranians. We're saying Kim Jong-un firing missiles over Japan, and our ability to be a world leader to contain these hot spots is decreased by the weird combination of Trump not really showing resolve in the face of these people, coddling dictators, minimizing these situations, and then making these crazy bellicose statements that people may react to. You know, the most interesting world event over the past 3 years is that there haven't been really that many interesting world events. And Trump has had the break of not having to face a crisis. But the toll is mounting here. Things are getting worse in Iran, worse in North Korea, trade war getting out of control. And how Donald Trump will do with it when the bell finally rings, that's a very scary thing.
Frank Figliuzzi, you've sort of pulled the curtain back on how folks in counterintelligence profile certain figures. I mean, I've asked former Director Brennan this question and others in the intel community. How would you profile Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think it is helpful to think in those terms, and let's pretend he as many people would choose to, that he's not the president of the United States. He's the leader of some other nation. How would we assess that? So first, we spent the first block talking about how he has to craft the truth and shape it so that it fits his narrative, his image of himself. One of the things that assessors would focus on is his continual reference, both verbally and in writing, to himself in the third person. This is troubling on many levels. So he'll say things like, Donald J. Trump is hereby saying this. He doesn't say, I'm saying this. And that is kind of this, it goes back to the first block, shaping things so that he is something more powerful than human. He's disembodying, he's distancing himself from reality and referring to himself almost as another entity. Where do we see that? We see that in places like North Korea. Kim Jong-un and his predecessors, all in the eyes of their citizens, are viewed as a kind of demigod, somebody that can never be wrong because they're godlike, someone that could never be criticized because they're always right. And the problem with that, with someone who has to be always right, even when they're wrong, is that you lose the relevance and the credibility amongst our allies, and our adversaries view you as easily manipulated and as giving them license to do whatever they wish. And we're seeing that play out with Putin and North Korea.
And Frank, I guess back to some of the questions I had for you in the first block. If you had to ask me from the outside who nailed the profile of Donald Trump the best, it would be the Saudis, who put a picture of him up on the side of a hotel. They did the dancing. He touched the orb. And then lo and behold, when Khashoggi ends up dismembered and slaughtered, Donald Trump's out there on the front lawn saying, no, 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 don't believe Gina Haspel. Don't believe what you see. Don't believe what you hear. I believe rogue killers. I mean, in plain view, the quid, the pro, and the quo are right there. Do they really have to think very hard to profile Donald Trump?
No, he's easily manipulated by courting him and stroking the ego. And we see that with state visits. We see the red carpet rolled out. We see it with North Korea. Think about how often Trump mentions those lovely letters, the beautiful letters coming from Kim Jong-un. Those are ego strokers. Kim Jong-un has figured him out, and as a result has been able to fire off missile after missile without any retribution. It's a very simple equation with him. Stroke the ego, you get what you want.
Rick Stengel, if heaven forbid we should end up in a military crisis with Iran, I think we'll be combing through this New York Times Magazine piece, all of us, to understand the history, not just under Donald Trump, but under President Obama, how that relationship, you know, how the sort of tectonic plates really pressed hard. Maybe what was viewed as a divide, or what's reported in the piece as a divide between the Cheney camp and the Bush camp. In terms of how far to go. But what do you make of sort of all of the buckets of sleeping as yet realized crises on the horizon on the foreign policy front for this White House?
Well, I agree with Ron's point. We've been blessed in a way to not have a crisis. But the problem is that, you know, Donald Trump is like the boy who throws his hat over the wall. he's creating something that will eventually become a crisis. Like, he's not bellicose, as Peter said. He doesn't necessarily want to shoot missiles, but he's putting himself in a situation with Iran, for example, where it becomes this tit for tat. And then, as a guy who is so insecure and has to double down on everything, at the end of the day, he can't just say, oh, well, maybe I'll just go over and talk to Rouhani. He has to do something. So that's part of the, and be like an old-fashioned government person. Part of the reason we did all of these things and everything was a step-by-step process is that you didn't get in a position where you had to do something that you didn't want to do. He's constantly getting himself in a situation where he has to do something he doesn't want to do because of this cavernous insecurity that he has. I mean, we should somehow be able to test people for security, for a sense of feeling secure, and only elect secure people to office. Insecure people are the worst people to govern, and we have the most insecure person in the universe in the Oval Office.
Yeah, I think a guy who was running for president talking about the size of his hands probably was a real tip-off about the insecurity thing. I'm not even going to go there.
As a woman at the table,
I don't think we really needed a big test to figure that out.
Told us gals everything we needed to know.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.